David asked me before, and Ed. So basically, we are giving like a very hefty course with textbooks, slideshows, everything. It's going to be August 4 weeks, August 10th, 17th, 24th, and 31st. It's a JLI course, Jewish Learning Institute course. You sign up and everything. We're going to do it in Yavapai College. So that course, basically, the course is called Strength and Struggle.
So August 10th through 31st.
Yeah, and it's going to be Thursdays at 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. That course is going to cover a bunch of personalities in the Bible. Some of them are a little bit controversial, and it's going to try and learn lessons from them, like practical lessons, and kind of David and Bathsheba is one of the weeks. And the idea of that course is you kind of try to understand what the Torah and the Talmud and the Jewish tradition is expressing through the stories. So 1 week will be Yiftach Hagiladi. In English, he's known as Jephthah. I don't know if that helps anyone.
Oh, yeah, sure.
We're going to learn about him.
And his daughter?
We're going to learn about King Saul, Ruth, and King David.
Wow.
And we're going to cover those personalities. It's going to be very interesting. So anyway, that's number one. Number two, we're starting something new today, and we'll talk about that soon. But first, let's do the rambam. Okay, so we're learning about the laws of mezuzah. The laws of mezuzah. So yesterday we talked about how to write a mezuzah, and how to put one up. But today we're going to talk about which places are obligated to have a mezuzah. I want to tell you that it's simple, but it's also complicated. Because sometimes modern architecture can be complex, and sometimes myself, I don't have clarity. I'll see someone's house and say, I'm not sure. I have to double check if that needs a mezuzah or not. There are 10 conditions in a house. Now, the Rambam is going to go through his opinion. In Jewish law, actually, we somewhat follow the Rambam in this context, but there are other opinions that are a little bit more strict, and sometimes we follow them. There are 10 conditions in a house, and then those cause, this is Rambam chapter 6, laws of mezuzah and tefillin, mezuzah, and sefer Torah. There are 6 conditions, and afterwards the person living there needs to put a mezuzah. And if you're missing one of these 10 conditions, you are exempt from a mezuzah. These are the 10 conditions. Number 1, the house room has to be more than 6 feet by 6 feet. It has to have 2 doorposts, and a lintel, and a roof, and doors, and it has to be at least 10 tfachim, which is about 34 inches or 32 inches tall, and it has to be used like a regular room. It has to be meant for a human person, and it has to be honorable, and it has to be a set place that a person could be. Those are the 10 conditions. Now we're going to go through them in detail again. Okay, now note, the Rambam is saying the basic law. There are different opinions who add to this, but we're not going to go into those. A house that does not have 4 cubits by 4 cubits doesn't need a mezuzah. And if it has enough to make that space, even if it's circle or 5 corners, so you have to measure the area. So since it has the ability to do that, it needs a mezuzah. A porch, and that's a place that there's 3 walls and a roof, even though it has 2 posts on the 4th side, it's not obligated mezuzah, because those are not really doorways. Those are just pillars to hold it up. And similarly, a roof, which does not have any walls, but it's standing on 4 posts, so that's like a pergola. Even though it looks like a house, it's exempt from mezuzah because it doesn't have any doorposts for a door. Okay, these are just posts to hold it up. A house that has mezuzah here, a doorpost here and a doorpost there, and a arch on top. If there is in the area of that arch 10 tfachim or more, you need a mezuzah. But if there is not, you are exempt because there is no lintel. So yeah, if you have an arch like this and there's no doorposts, right? It doesn't need a mezuzah. It's like this. If it's diagonal slanted the whole way.
No tent would ever need a mezuzah.
A tent would not, but we'll see soon. A house that has no roof is exempt from mezuzah. If part of it is roof, part of it's not. It seems to me that if the roof part is next to the doorway, it needs a mezuzah. And you put a door, and then afterwards you put a mezuzah. Har Habayis, the Temple Mount, and all the rooms and everything, and synagogues, because you do not live in them, you do not need a mezuzah because they're holy. The shul of farmlands, far off shuls, they need a mezuzah. And similarly, the shuls of the big cities, if people stay in them, in the olden days, you read the stories, people will go and sleep on benches in the shul. That's where they would go if they were traveling. And all the gates in
Nikanor?
1 second. Okay, sorry. So it shows where people sleep. You need a mezuzah. The gates which were in the temple, they didn't have mezuzahs except for Shar Nikanor. That's the main gate. Mentally, you want to show them where it is. And inside the part Lishchas Palhedrin, because that was a place where the Kohen would sleep. The high priest would sleep on Yom Kippur. A place where you keep hay.
Isn't Licious Behadri one of these rooms?
Yeah, so you have this gate had a mezuzah, this main gate here, and this one here. Probably because the Kohen would enter through that gate, so that was like his house gate almost when he would sleep there. Okay, a place where you storage, or you have animals or wood, or those are exempt from mezuzah because the Torah says beisacha al mezuzot beisacha, your house, and that excludes different farm buildings. Therefore, a place where you have you have a refus bucker, which is a okay, 1 second. A place where with animals that women, I guess in those days, would get put on makeup on, that needs a mezuzah because they're using it for human use. So now you have a base shar. So a lot of times you have gates to certain places. They have like a little house where like a guard stays or something like that, or where you store stuff, right? And that might be in a farm. Those are exempt from mezuzah because they're not meant to live there. But if there are houses there, then it needs a mezuzah. Therefore, number 8, the gates of courtyards and fields, and the gates of tunnels and pathways, and similarly the gates of cities, they all need a mezuzah because their house is there and it's open to them. And even 10 houses, this one open to another one, this one open to this one, since the inner one is obligated on mezuzah, they're all obligated on mezuzah. So if you have a residential area and there's like a gate in the front, that gate is tied to the residential area. And that's why they say the gate which goes from the garden to the courtyard. So let's say you have a courtyard, a house, a courtyard, and a garden. They all need a mezuzah. It needs a mezuzah because even though you're going to a courtyard and you say no one's living there, it's a gate which protects the person who's living in the inside. Number 9, a bathroom and a bathhouse, and a mikvah, and a place where they're doing leather. They're exempt from mezuzah because you can't really live there honorably. The sukkah on the holidays, and a house and a boat, they're exempt from mezuzah because you don't live there long term, or you can't live there stably, and you don't live there stably. Two pergolas of a certain type. One's inside, the other one, the outside doesn't need a mezuzah, the inside does. Similarly, stores don't need a mezuzah because you don't live in stores. So we put a mezuzah on stores, on commercial places, but you don't actually need to. So a lot of people say you don't make the blessing on it because it's not clear that biblically you need to put it because you're not living there. A house which has, so did you know that, Paul? You don't actually have to put a mezuzah on a store or a restaurant or a commercial place, biblically. A house that has many doorways.
But they do.
They do. But many say you shouldn't make a blessing.
Shouldn't
make a blessing because the blessing you say, Asher Kitchanu b'Mitzvotav v'Tzivanu, God commanded me to do it, and it's not clear, since you don't live there, it's not clear it needs a mezuzah, biblically.
Because we have.
Every store in Jewish communities has a mezuzah. I encourage you to put a mezuzah. And they make a big celebration when they put a mezuzah. But it's not obligated like a house.
Is it rabbinic?
Yeah. A house that has many doorways. Even though you only go through one door, you have to put a mezuzah on every door. A small doorway between the house and the attic needs a mezuzah. A room in the house, even any other room, needs to put a mezuzah on all the doorways leading to that room. So that's about putting in a room, what Ron asked yesterday. Okay. A house between a base midrash and a base knesses. If you go out in that room, you need a mezuzah. A doorway between two houses, wherever you can see the doorway, that's where you put a mezuzah. How do you put a mezuzah? You put it in the width, right, of the doorway.
What's the width?
So you put it in the width of the doorway, right?
Door frame.
The door frame in the 4 inches towards the outside. That's the best place to put a mezuzah.
The top bends towards the outside.
What? Yes, the best place to put a mezuzah. Now, there's certain times and you can't do it, we'll say, but that's the best place. And you put it at the bottom of the third section. So you divide the doorway in three, bottom of the third section. And if you put it up higher, it's kosher. As long as it is 4 inches away from the top. If it's within 4 inches to the top, then it's not a kosher placement. And you put it on the right side of the person entering the house. And if you put it on the left side, it is not kosher. Right? So that's a big problem. You put a mezuzah and you put it on the left side, it is not kosher. A house which is owned by two partners, it needs a mezuzah. A person has to be very careful with mezuzah because it's a constant obligation. And whenever he goes and enters that, he's passing by the oneness of Hashem, and he's supposed to remember His love, and it's supposed to wake him to repent and from his slumber, and he will know that there's nothing else more important in the world than knowing God. And right away he'll go and walk in the proper paths. The rabbi says, anyone who has tefillin on his head and on his arm, and tzitzis on his garments, and a mezuzah in his doorway, he will not sin. There is a chazaka, he will not sin. Because he's constantly mentioning God, constantly reminding himself of God, and these are the angels which save him from sinning. As it says, that's the end of the laws of mezuzah, and tomorrow is the laws of writing a Torah.
In the discussion, in the Talmud, there must be long discussions of these laws.
Yeah. So the Rambam is doing the basic, but there are, in the Code of Jewish law, there are a lot of other opinions about when you need it and when you should put it, even if you don't need it.
So,
Does
go ahead.
the Knesset have a mezuzah?
Very likely, most likely. I mean, the airport does.
The airport does.
Yeah, so I'm sure the Knesset does.
In the paragraph that we read, it says, you shall put them on the doorposts of your house. Could that,
And your gates.
And your-
V'secha u'visharecha.
okay, sorry. It seems one way of interpreting that would be just the main entry to your house. That's the doorpost of your house. In the discussion in the Talmud, do the rabbis sort of debate whether from the outside to,
So
I'm just curious.
So the way it's kind of put is everyone agrees you should put it on every door, but because every door is a house, but there is precedence to the front door and the front gate because the verse specifies that. So if you have one mezuzah or you're only able to put one mezuzah, the house that has precedence. The other rooms are secondary. The Rambam here does not differentiate in Jewish law, but in other places it does somewhat differentiate on the importance of it. In other words, everyone in the Talmud agrees that you need it, but if you would have one mezuzah, that would be, for example, you only have one mezuzah or money for one mezuzah or whatever it is, then you would put it on the front door because that is the door of the house. But yeah, I have to check up because I remember the results of the study several years ago. The results of the study when I was still studying in Kollel, the results of the study was you give precedence to the front door, but also let's say you're staying in a hostel, you stay in a dormitory, your door needs a mezuzah. The other doors the front door does not need a mezuzah unless everybody's Jewish because you're sharing that door with the people who you don't own the front door rights, but your personal door needs it. So there are, typically, a lot of people I know, they start with one door and add, that's
I'm curious, you mentioned dormitory. Do colleges permit Jewish students to put it on their dorm door?
Absolutely. I mean, when they don't, it's always like a big,
I would think it would
big
be, so.
anti-Semitism and everything like that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw this discussion between, Chabad on campus rabbis, they typically give mezuzahs out for free because the students won't buy them. And I saw a group of them, they're trying to order like a mass order, and some of these colleges have 12,000 Jewish kids, 10,000 Jewish kids, like ASU, I think they said I was around 10,000 Jewish kids, ASU, and so it was interesting to see them talking, where are you ordering mezuzahs? Well, if we can all order 5,000 mezuzahs together, we can get a cheaper price, and it was kind of impressive to see them talking in those terms. But yeah, it's a big thing actually in college, and a lot of college students, that's kind of their first entry to college, where the rabbi will call them and say, "Hey, let's put a mezuzah up on your door. What a great opportunity!" And like that might be the first mezuzah they ever put up in their life. So that's kind of interesting thing.
Yeah. I would say we needed 15 or 20 mezuzahs.
So
We only have them on our front door.
so it's good to add slowly also, because like it can be pricey. The truth is, I mean, that's one of those things that like, what can I say, like an Orthodox family in New York or something, they would buy at any cost. Of course, mezuzahs start at about $50-$60 now, and they go as high as you can afford. I mean,
They have to be handwritten, right?
they have to be handwritten. We spoke about the laws yesterday. They have to be handwritten in a very specific way. Okay, let's start. Because we were learning about Mashiach, I wanted to, and our heads are in the Laws of Kings, chapter 11. I thought, like, hey, let's learn more about the Laws of Kings, chapter 11. There are 4 famous talks of the Rebbe on the Laws of Kings in the Rambam, where he teaches about Mashiach. Very innovative, revolutionary talks, and those are considered like the 4 fundamental talks of the Rebbe of entering the subject of Mashiach. And the Rebbe actually gave them out, like he had them printed and gave them out to each person walking by. It was a big deal that the Rebbe did that. So I figured we'll learn another one. I don't know if we'll learn all 4. Some of them are a little more complicated, but I figured let's start with this one. So this one here is going to go through the texts where we know we have to believe in Mashiach from the Torah. Now, of course, if you have a biblical mitzvah, it has to either be written in the Torah, or it can be a law from Moses at Sinai, right? We mentioned in Tefillin, there's a lot of laws, and mezuzahs, there's a lot of laws which are not written in the Torah, but they go back to Moses at Sinai, and if you don't have it that way, it's not Tefillin. Even if you say, hey, show me it in writing, it doesn't need to be in writing. But nevertheless, the Rambam always specifies in his book what it has a source in the Torah and what doesn't, even though they both have the same validity. So here the Rambam, this is from the beginning of chapter 11. Kasav HaRambam B'Hilchos Malachim. The Rambam writes in the Laws of Kings. Now, in the previous chapter, the Rambam was talking about what are the laws of a king? King David, King Saul. If a king sins really badly, commits adultery, do you have to fire him? Right? These are big questions, right? All sorts of different things like that. So also, like, what is a king's job? A king has to write a Torah, he has to lead the people, lead the wars, etc., etc. Then in chapter 11, the Rambam continues. HaMelech HaMashiach Osid Lamoid Ulahachzer Malchus David Liyosha. In the future time, the king Mashiach will arise and renew the kingship of the house of David. And he goes through some details of what he's going to do, and we're skipping that here. And he continues. V'chol mi she'enim mamin boi. Anyone who does not believe in him. Or does not await for his coming, he's not only denying the statements of other prophets, because the other prophets, they go in great depth about Mashiach, he is denying the statements of the Torah and Moses our king, because the Torah testifies about him. Right, so Moses teaches about Mashiach. And the Torah teaches about Mashiach. So if you don't believe him and you don't wait for him, that's 2 clauses we'll deal with. You have to believe in him and wait for him. Then you are denying the Torah and Moses. What are the verses? Shenemar v'shav Hashem alekecha es shavoscha v'rachamecha v'shav v'kibetzcha. It says, Im yeh nidacha m'ktzei hashamayim v'haviyacha Hashem. It says, God, your Lord, will return you from your captivity. He will have mercy upon you and gather you again from all the nations. So this is in the Torah. And the Rambam continues. So he says, you will gather from all the nations. If your dispersed remnants will be the furthest reaches of the heavens, God will bring you. These explicit words of the Torah include all that was said on the subject by the prophets. So almost like there's a general clause in the Torah which God says God will return all the Jews from exile, even from the furthest places, and the prophets are essentially elaborating on that verse. prophets go in great depth of how it will happen, what it will look like. Af b'parshas Bilam Namar. There's also a reference in the parsha of Bilam. V'sham niba b'shnei mashiachim. There he prophesies about two anointed kings. B'mashiach harishon shu David. The first anointed king was David. U'mashiach ha'achron she'emin bav, and the ultimate anointed king who will arise from among his descendants. Or maybe kama psukim mi parshas Bilam or mefarshim al David ba'al Melech Mashiach. Then the Rambam quotes like all these verses from Bilam, and Bilam says three oracles we find in the Torah. He says three things, future prophecies, and one of them keeps describing two people. So the Jewish tradition is one is talking about King David, who's the first Moshiach, because he's the first king from King David, and one is the last Moshiach. In the next law, the Rambam continues. Af ba'ari miklat hu emer im yarchiv Hashem alekecha es gevulcha. If God expands your borders, you shall add, you should add 3 more cities. This never happened. God never expanded our borders yet. And God would not command us in vain. He wouldn't give us a mitzvah in vain. Okay. In the prophets, you don't need to quote proofs about Mashiach because there's full chapters in the prophets and actually full books talking about Mashiach. So that's how the Rambam starts off, and he says the proofs from the Torah and why a Jew has to believe in a way Mashiach.
But it says here, when God will expand your borders, you shall add 3 more cities. Why do they assume that can only happen after the Messiah?
Oh, the Rambam just says it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Now, with regarding expanding borders of Israel, in order to make Israel holy, like let's say the country conquers the Sinai, Israel conquers the Sinai, it doesn't really make the Sinai holy like Israel. In order to do that, it has to be with the biblical process. So now, God is going to give us more land. That would be with a king conquering it, putting it under Israel. Now, which land is that referring to? The promised land is the 3 more Keni, Knizi, Kadmoni, the Trans-Jordan land between the Euphrates and Israel. That is the land that we expect to get back in the Torah.
So they expand eastward.
Yes,
northeast.
yes, and we, just note that that is the promised land to Abraham. That's the boundaries that God showed Abraham.
Did you go to the intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates?
Yes.
That's in Iraq.
Yes, so that's the land where God showed Abraham, and if you think about it, the grand term, the promised land, we have not received yet. We have not gotten it yet.
This may seem like a really foolish question, but Nevi'im and Ketuvim carry the same weight as Torah. They're Torah Misina.
So yes. So now Nevi'im and Ketuvim, they're all from God. They're all from God. Torah has a different methodology, the 5 books of Moses, because they're God speaking in a higher level of prophecy. But they're all 3 books are prophecy. So I'll give you an example. If the one thing we'll see with the Rambam, as we saw in the last talk, if the Torah promises something, we assume that it's literal, unless we have a tradition otherwise. If the prophets promise something, we don't have to assume it's literal, unless they specify. So that's the difference. But yes, they all are all words of God. That's what we assume. And as we've said before in different contexts, we said, what gives validity to the Nevi'im? What gives the validity to the prophets? If you listen to a prophet, who are you listening to? You're listening to Moses. Remember, we studied in the laws of prophecy in the Rambam. He says Moses is the one that said to listen to prophets. So if a prophet comes to somebody in the context that Moses says how to recognize a prophet, really you're not listening to him only. You're listening to Moses' mitzvah. So yeah.
So this is tangential. So if you want to ignore I won't be offended. Why aren't Nevi'im and Ketuvim given separately from the Torah?
Outside of Moses?
Well,
What do you mean? I'm not sure what you mean.
well, there does seem to be, again, I don't mean to divert the whole discussion, so we can save
Yeah.
it for another time. But there's a difference between Torah and Nevi'im and Ketuvim. We only read the Torah weekly, for example. And you just said
What do you mean? We only read it weekly?
we read a weekly.
Yeah, correct. We
portion.
also read Shabbos, Monday, Thursday. Right.
Well, I didn't
Yeah,
mean to
yeah.
exclude them,
Okay.
but I'm saying
Yeah.
the Parsha, we do read a Haftorah, but they're not on the same level.
Correct. Well, let me put it another way.
I don't know,
Let me put it just another way. The Torah is written by Moses and God, and the prophets are there to protect the Torah and to bring. The prophet's job is to bring the Torah to a new generation. That's the purpose of the prophet.
why is it 3 sections, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, and not one section
So,
that includes all of it?
so general gist is, so there are different levels of prophecy. All prophets, Moses' prophecy is direct word from God.
Right.
So that's why it gets that special status, the 5 books of Moses. If you look in Jewish history, as Jewish people went through, whatever exiles and whatever things, God sent prophets who the Rambam says those prophets they're really like shluchim of Moses. We don't believe in a prophet on his own right ever. We only believe in a prophet because he's an extension of Moses. But those prophets, so the short answer is their prophecy was not on the level of Moses. So therefore it's not as directly clear and relevant to every generation.
Okay, so you use that word direct. I was just going to say, would it be wrong to say the prophets then is given indirectly from God?
Less directly, yeah.
Less direct.
Yes.
But
So-
they claim that God spoke to them.
Correct. But not in the...
Without exception.
Yeah, so the Torah says, but no one delivers God's message as clearly as
Right,
Moses.
That I understand.
Yeah.
I had another, I don't know, I understand the Haftorah always come from the prophets, right? And God spoke to them. But the Ketuvim, God speak to the Psalms, everything else. You don't have
Proverbs.
God playing a role in here.
So we do have...
Directly, do we?
So we do in the Ketuvim, but they're different level, so to speak, different levels. So Esther, the Talmud says, Esther was written with prophecy, with Ruach HaKodesh. There's different levels of prophecy, and there are different ways prophecy comes down. So that's the short answer. So Ketuvim are different.
But, a lot of times they'll quote something, in a psalm about the moshiach. But the Psalms were
So the Psalms were written with Ruach HaKodesh, it says, and that you
the
can
Holy
see.
Spirit, so to speak.
So it was a certain level of prophecy, yeah, a lower level of prophecy.
And where do we hear it? How do we know that?
So that's we see it from the Psalms and we see it from other contexts of the prophets. That's the Jewish tradition. I mean,
It's more
yeah.
tradition and rabbis' opinion.
Well, not necessarily do prophets. Not every prophet always says God told me to say this, right? So.
I know that. I thought they did.
So sometimes they do, sometimes not. So, but we know who the prophets are, and we know what's prophecy and what's not prophecy, and what's,
Sorry.
yeah. Okay, ready to go on? All right. So let's just summarize the Rambam. The Rambam brings kind of a verse from Deuteronomy about God, the ingathering. Eventually, there will be an ingathering of every Jewish person, no matter where. So that's one verse in Deuteronomy. And then we have the prophecies of Bilam. Bilam is about, he says all these different parables about one guy coming and saving the Jewish people, another guy, and then destroying Amalek and everything like that. And then finally, we have the one about the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge. For those who don't know, cities of refuge were cities that if you murder somebody, if someone murders someone by accident, right? So he murders someone. Yes, he murders someone by accident. So in the Talmud, the famous example is he has a axe, and the axe flies out of his hand, or the axe breaks while he's doing it. So he has to go to a city of refuge until the Kohen dies. These were special cities. So the Torah says you put, in Israel 6 cities. Also the Levite cities were also cities of refuge. 6 cities which were directly for the city of refuge. And then the Torah says, if God, and when God gives you more land, you'll put 3 more. So the Rambam says that never happened. We can't establish cities of refuge now. So he says, obviously, there has to be an era where the king will come back and set up that extra land and the extra cities of refuge. There is a famous discussion after Moshiach comes, will you need cities of refuge? Will people murder people? So that's a very interesting discussion, not for now. Yeah, because that gets his own merit. Okay. So v'yesh la'ayin. So the Rebbe, when the Rambam quotes verses in the Torah, he's always including and excluding. In general, anyone from that era, if they say, let me give you several proofs from the Torah, none of those proofs are extra. They're all to teach you something. That is the way rabbis and teachers and the Talmud, that's the way they spoke back then. Nowadays, they'd say, let me bring you 40 verses in the Torah to show you, right? But then each verse was, no, we believe in all the verses of the Torah. We don't need to show 40, right? So he says, the prophets, I'm not even going to bring any. You could just open the prophets and see for yourself. But I'm going to bring these proofs from the Torah to teach us what we need to believe in Mashiach. So v'yesh la'ayin, ma chasr ba'arayas harishaynes, v'shav b'parshas Nitzav and parshas Bilam, shehuzko karam l'haisav araya, gam ha'kasar b'ari miklad. What? So we have the parsha in Deuteronomy, we have the one in Bilam, and the one in this week's parsha. What is lacking from the first two that we need to bring? We need to say, and even with regard to a city of refuge, there's also a proof. What is lacking? Why do we need that proof? Now, the Rambam is going to say, well, why do we need the first two? Well, the necessity in the first proofs is understood. The Rambam here, he's not just speaking about believing that there'll be world peace or believing there'll be a messianic era. Jewish people have to believe there will be a human Mashiach, a human Messiah. That's what Jewish people have to believe. That's part of the mitzvah. In addition to believing that there'll be a redemption, that God will redeem the Jewish people, not getting into details, a Jew has to believe there will be a king Messiah. Inclusive of whatever the Rambam is going to say in this chapter, Mashiach, who is Mashiach and what is Mashiach. The Rambam gets into that in the next laws with Ben Koziva, Bar Kachba, and everything like that. Kediak Lashon Rambam, as the Rambam actually says here, he says, "V'chol mi she'einu ma'amin bo." Anyone who doesn't believe in him. Anyone who doesn't believe in him. So, the davar, we're on page 55. That is not explicit in the verse in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, I would say that what does it testify about? It says there will be an ingathering of the exiles. It doesn't really say anything about Mashiach. It says there will be God will gather everybody back, right? So if you just say that verse, that would be a proof that there will be a geula, a redemption in the Torah, right? Torah says at the end of days, God will gather all the Jewish people back to Israel, right? So that would be a belief. How we gather back, who's going to do it? Doesn't say, right? So we understand why the Rambam needs to bring what it says in Bilam. Elorak b'parshas Bilam shesham niba b'shnei hamashichim. Bilam testifies in Parshas Balak. He says there will be 2 kings, 2 anointed kings. David u'melech HaMashiach, and our Jewish tradition of that is King David and Mashiach. There's the first one and the last one. In fact, if you look at the Rambam, he brings like the whole oracle of Bilam. It calls, it says, it brings the context, the terms that Bilam uses to describe King David and Mashiach. They show the qualities of King David and Mashiach. As we explain elsewhere, there's a whole talk about how Bilam, a whole talk from the Rebbe going through Bilam, each word of the verses that the Rambam quotes, to talk about who Mashiach is. Uleidach, Lo yistapik b'raya b'parshas Bilam. And the Rambam it's not, so again, the first verse teaches us there will be a redemption. Right? The second proof in the Rambam from Bilam teaches us that it'll be a somebody, there'll be a someone. Ulidach leistapik b'rayim in Parshas Bilam v'oizes shavia rak raya shnia ki ein konas Rambam kan rak l'havi rayis b'teresh b'ksav al bias Mashiach el lechiach d'mish ein mayim l'koifer b'teir Moshe Rabbeinu shavia Torah hidala v'edus azeh ein rak al pi perish p'sukei Torah sh'val peh. The Rambam knows that some people are going to say that's not direct. Bilam doesn't say directly in the Torah of Mashiach. That's the Jewish tradition of what Bilam's saying. Now, what does Bilam say directly? He says there'll be a shooting star of a guy. There'll be a shooting star of a guy. He doesn't say directly there will be a Mashiach at the end of days. So therefore, the Rambam wants to say here that you are denying what the Torah says about Mashiach, right? So Bilam, there'll be some smart Alex who say this is tradition. This isn't written in the Torah, right? So therefore, even if you deny the Jewish tradition, the Rambam says earlier, and we studied it, you are denying the whole Torah, right? There's no such thing as, I only believe in the written of the Torah, in the Torah's context. And the Torah specifies that clearly elsewhere. However, the Rambam is saying here, this is clearly in the Torah. Bilam is talking in parable. There's no question he's talking in parable in the Torah. On the other, so the second set of verses from Bilam, those are parables. And the Rambam wants to say it's clear in the Torah. The first verse about the ingathering of the exiles, that is clear in the Torah. So the Rambam is going to say all these things, if you look in the Torah, these are a package deal. You have one guy talking about a person at the end of days, one verse talking about a redemption. Well, they all come together at the end of days.
Can't pick and choose.
So you can't pick and choose. Well, he's saying that if you just had Bilam, you might say, that's a parable, I don't believe in it, even though that's a problem as well. But if you have a clear verse and you have Bilam, well, at the end of days, we have all these different things that are going to happen. We're going to have to put them together. For example, Amalek will be wiped out. That's another thing that Bilam says. Let's just finish this thing.
Okay.
But after we know that there'll be a guy and there'll be a redemption, what are we adding from a proof about the cities of refuge? Also, another question. The Rambam puts both proofs of Bilam and the redemption in one law. He finishes that law, period, goes into the next law, and he says, by the way, in the city of refuge, we can also prove that Mashiach is coming, there'll be a redemption. Why doesn't he include all three together? So our question is, in a previous talk of the Rebbe, I actually meant to print that talk today, but somehow it got messed up, and I thought we were going to study that. It's Divine Providence. We'll study this one. This one is going to give actually possibly the lesser known subject of Mashiach is going to be included in this talk here. So that's a nice thing. But the question is why does the Rambam not suffice with the promise of redemption and the prophecies of Mashiach at that time? Why doesn't he suffice with that when he's trying to prove that it's clear in the Torah that a Mashiach is coming? And he brings this third subject of the cities of refuge. Now, what's interesting to note is there are other places in the Torah where it talks about future things happening, and the Rambam does not quote those places at all. So obviously these three proofs that the Rambam is quoting are there to teach us a central idea and understand what Mashiach is from the Torah's perspective. Yeah, Ed, what's your question?
Where did the three cities, where does that appear in the, does that appear in the Torah?
This week's Parsha.
Okay. The other thing is, in Exodus, God said we will wage eternal war against Amalek, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought in Deuteronomy it said Amalek was defeated.
They were defeated in several wars, but Bilam says, Reishis Goyim Amalek, Vachrise Ade Oived. The first people to attack the Jewish people in Exodus was Amalek,
right?
And they're the last ones that will be destroyed. So Amalek in Jewish history, the only guy who had a chance to kill all of them was King Saul. He killed everyone except for the king of Amalek and the animals. And as we know in Jewish tradition,
Oh, that was the
Yeah.
king of Amalek that he
yes,
spared.
yes. And we know Haman is from Amalek, and there are still Amalekites today, and they will only finally be destroyed when Bilam says at the end of time. In that context, he says there will someone who will get up, and etc., and then Amalek will finally be destroyed.
But
That
God
was
also,
Saul's big mistake.
That was his big mistake. We'll study about that.
because God also said, I waged eternal war against Amalek, and now it's up to you guys,
Yes,
Israelites,
and
to wage eternal
so
war,
in the
right?
so actually one of the things that it says about Amalek is it says God says when you finish the war against Amalek, my name will be complete. So yeah, he gives
And
us the mission.
I'm trying to tie that in to the sense of no matter where the Jews are, they're usually the most persecuted, but they're also usually the first to rise up, at least verbally, against a dictator. And I'm wondering if this is part of it, that's connected to the eternal war against Amalek, the fact that the Jews are often in the forefront of
Yeah, likely it is. Now, Amalekites, if you would meet someone from Amalekite, you have a mitzvah to kill him.
but you never know if he was from.
But the Rambam says you cannot do the mitzvah unless the kingdom of Israel is sovereign. So there has to be a king, King David, King Saul. For us, it would have to be Moshiach. That's next to the next king.
Yeah.
We don't know who's from Amalekite anymore.
We have no way.
There is this fascinating story with the author of the Code of Jewish Law that he got mugged on the way to the yeshiva one day, and he turned around and killed the guy and buried him. And he came, and his teacher was like a prophet. He said, something's glowing about you. You did like a rare mitzvah today. What was it? He said, I don't know. He said, I'll tell you, someone mugged me, and self-defense, I killed it. And he said, oh, that guy was from Amalek. But nowadays we don't. Now, Amalek in Jewish, even the Rambam says Amalek in Jewish idea is more of a metaphysical, concept nowadays. Yeah.
Who is Haman?
Haman was a great grandson of the king. He was the story of Purim. You know the story of Purim? So he was the guy who tried to destroy the Jewish people in that era when the Jewish people were exiled out of Israel about 2,400 years ago. So he was a scion of the family of Amalek. Haman, it says in the Talmud that he had like 250 kids. So
Seriously?
yeah. So
Many different wives.
yeah, obviously use your imagination. I was studying that in Talmud. The Talmud gives a few opinions, and people were scoffing at me. So I said, well, have you guys ever heard of Genghis Khan?
That's right.
Genghis Khan had I think 900 kids or something. He had
Well, a huge number, maybe 25% of all Asians
are from Genghis Khan.
are descended from Genghis Khan.
Well, so you can use your imagination. But yeah, Haman was Amalekite. And are there Amalekites today? So, Jewish people always like to say that anti-Semite, he must be from Amalek, and it might be, might not be, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes anti-Semites are Jewish nowadays, So I don't know, I can't verify Amalekites. If we know one Amalekite, then we can trace one back, then we can do DNA, like the Kohanim. But what happened was, there was a certain era where basically in Jewish history, Jewish people were the last ones to keep their lineage. All the other nations were mixed together by the king Sancherib of Shalmaneser at the times of the first temple, and that caused that no other nation can trace back to going back.
Even some Yidden.
Now, that would be in the Middle East, no other nation.
Yeah, I mean, non-Middle East, I don't know if people
I don't know
trace
if
back.
people live
I don't know if people kept their
Well,
lineage.
that's interesting.
I don't know if
because,
people live there.
722, the Assyrians, who was that? And then he mixed everybody
That's
up.
Sancherib or Shalmaneser, the Syrian
he
king.
would totally mix all the
Correct.
population
So
up.
as a result, it's actually very interesting because
Fun fact.
nowadays there is a certain interesting